Chancellor at that meeting, and one of the first points he made was, we're in government with a kleptocracy, which of course I knew, but a lot of other people didn't, because at that time, as Bronwyn and Romain said, the Irish Fianna Fáil Taoiseach, Prime Minister, was being investigated for corruption, and subsequently he had to stand down because it was just too embarrassing for the Fianna Fáil party and the government. But there's a long history of corruption in Fianna Fáil. Probably the most ever corrupt Prime Minister, Charlie Haughey, was a Fianna Fáil leader. I mean, he embezzled the country to the tune of millions. There was a tribunal set up to investigate him, but it's typical of the Irish political situation. The tribunals only ever report years later. By the time they reported, finding all this evidence against him, he was safely dead. So, Fianna Fáil they have a very, very bad track record. In a number of the meetings we had at the Green Islands Network with Irish delegates, I mean, one of the first things that happened is that Irish organisations started to contact us here, the Anti-Blood Sports Association, some of the groups campaigning against rendition and so on, began to send us appeals saying, can you intervene with the Irish Green Party or now in government to get various things done. And the protocol was, we don't do that, it's a sovereign nation, its own government. So we wrote back to this organisation and said, we can't do that, we can pass on your concerns to the party or to the minister, but we can't actually interfere. And we don't interfere. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't discuss things. But we were very clear that we weren't responsible. But it was significant that already early on in the government, those sort of appeals were reaching us. Now we had a number of very stormy meetings. I think Romain was at one with the Irish delegates, where we actually began to flag up our concerns. And we made the point that some of these things that are happening are having an impact on us as well. And they were extremely defensive, and they told us that we had never been in government, we had no understanding of how it worked, and that we needed to get out of this NGO mindset, is what they said. We still have an NGO mindset. Now it's quite interesting what Bronwyn said. A lot of the organisations, NGOs and organisations, which were supportive of the Greens before they went into government, now regularly demonstrate outside their conferences, like the Shell to Sea people, the Save the Tara campaign, the Irish Neutrality League, people like that, who were very supportive of the Greens. There was even, I think last year, they occupied one of the Green Minister's offices, Minister for Energy, Eamon Ryan, because of what was happening with the Shell to Sea pipeline. But they were very, very defensive, and they didn't like these issues being raised. I mean, and they reached one point where they said one sister party shouldn't criticise another. But we actually said, well, I think we do need to discuss some of these issues between each other. I think there's an interesting comparison here with what's happened in the Czech Republic. In the Czech Republic, I went to quite a lot of the meetings of the European Green Party, council meetings and so on. And similar issues arose in the Czech Republic, where the party, under a very effective businessman, former businessman called Bursig, went into government with the right-wing ODS party. And one of the things the coalition government there had was supporting the US missile bases, the Star Wars bases, on Czech territory, which the vast majority of Czechs were opposed to. And a very similar thing has happened in the Czech Republic, in that the coalition eventually collapsed because two of the Green MPs couldn't vote any longer in its support. It brought the government down, and the leader of the Czech party has now left. There's a new leader. But there are a lot of parallels, I think, in the two situations. There's a very interesting article which appeared in Red Pepper recently. I've just had a look downstairs at the latest issues, and it's not there, but it is in the internet version, and I was hoping to bring it along with me. But it's written by a journalist, I think, called Christopher Lee, and it's called Bobo Politics. Bobo Politics in the Greens, I think. And it's an analysis of a very important argument that's going on at the moment in the European Green Party about where the Greens stand ideologically. And after the recent European election, as you know, the French party, which is sort of a broad coalition, really, of the French Greens and various environmental groups. Daniel Cohn-Bendit said, well, this proves that the electorate in Europe have had enough of the left. And Philippe Lambert, who was elected an MEP in Belgium, also gave a speech saying, our future is with the right. Now, this is a debate which had already started about a year or two ago in the European Green Party, and there are very strong feeling on both sides. But as Christopher Lee points out in the article, the danger with this strategy is, if you look at the Irish and the Czech situations, where they did go into government with quite right-wing parties, where they did make cuts in social care, in medical assistance and so on. I mean, there was a pensioners' revolt in Dublin last year where literally thousands of pensioners stormed the Irish Parliament, and the government was just so terrified they had to back down. And I watched it on the Irish television, and there was one of the Green TDs got up to try and speak to the crowd, and he was just shouted down. I mean, these were people in their 70s and 80s, just livid with fury. So, I think there's an important lesson to be learned here about going into coalition and, as Bronwyn said, having a bottom line, what your actual policies are. Two things I'd like to mention, which Bronwyn has addressed as well, is the Lisbon Treaty and the NAMA, the toxic bank scheme. The Lisbon Treaty position was the Irish Greens were opposed to it originally. They then took a vote last year before the first referendum, and the vote, they needed a 2/3 majority to either support or oppose the treaty. They didn't get that, so basically they took a neutral position. The party leadership supported the treaty, but the party itself didn't campaign. This time, because people like Bronwyn, Patricia McKenna, and a lot of the, how shall I say, more vocal members of the party have left, they held another conference recently, because the second referendum now is next month, and they won a majority by one vote. And so the official position is that they're now supporting the Lisbon Treaty. But again, that has caused a lot of concern amongst Green voters. And the NAMA scheme, I mean, which many economists in Ireland are warning could bankrupt the country for generations. I mean, it's an absolutely massive scheme, and there's some very, very dodgy banks and organisations which have connections with Fianna Fáil is basically a kleptocracy. They have been involved in scammy deals with developers and speculators and so on, and a lot of those people are their support base. And they are the people who are going to benefit from this, and the taxpayers will have to pay enormous amounts into the scheme. So there's a lot of concern amongst the Green membership and the Green voters. And I think Bronwyn was saying earlier, there's been a poll out today showing the vast 70-something% of Green voters are opposed
to this bank bailout scheme.
The other thing, again, coming back to the impact here, when I stood as a Euro candidate at hustings in London, there were a number of hustings organised by trade unions and so on, and of course one of the questions that frequently arose was, what about the Irish Greens? You were telling us this is your policy, what about the Irish Greens, look what they've done. And so it is becoming an issue. I mean, someone said to me, yes, you can argue the point that, well, what about some other party, for example, a sister party, another party. But I mean, it does have an impact, because the Greens, the branding is everything. You are seen as being, different, standing up for social justice, equality, as well as the environment. And once the message begins to come through, which it is increasingly, that that's not happening, then it is constantly thrown at you as a candidate. I think there's a need in general to look at the future of Irish politics, because I agree with Bronwyn's analysis. I think Green Party is now in a very difficult position because they could remain in this government for another 3 years, by which time I suspect they will suffer in the consequent election. If they go now, if they pull out of government, there's a real danger that they'll be annihilated as well. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. But I agree with Bronwyn. I think the original mistake, well, there were two mistakes. One was to go into government with Fianna Fáil in the first place, but secondly, not to have a much firmer bottom line. And they're actually in a stronger position now than they were in 2007. In 2007, Fianna Fáil had a majority and a number of independents, and the Greens were just taken on as an optional extra. Now, a number of Fianna Fáil's own backbenchers have left and are not supporting the government. So the Green vote is now absolutely essential. Without the Greens, Fianna Fáil can't govern. So they're actually in a stronger position now to make a list of firm demands, but they don't seem to be, and I think that's very disappointing. Well, anyway, whatever comes out of this meeting, I think, you know, I think we should continue our contacts with Bronwyn and people like Bronwyn, and I certainly would hope that the Irish Greens will reinvent themselves, or at least have a very, you know, serious look at what they've done, the mistakes they've made.
Thanks very much. Just before we go to questions, I think it was the absolute startling U-turns that did the damage to the Greens in Ireland.